There we go. And let me make sure everybody's muted. Okay, excellent. Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. Good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you are in the world. This is Leticia Emi from the GIIN. I am joined by my GIIN colleagues, Lisa Glasgow, Calendorio, and Grace Earle. And I'm really excited for today's session. We have a really good session planned for today. At the GIIN, as you probably know, we often focus our conversation around IMM for investors, but today we're going to give the room or to hear about how enterprises are using IRIS Plus. And so to that end, we have three remarkable organizations and women on the line with us. We have Belissa Rojas from Project X, which is a social enterprise working with supply chains to make supply chains more sustainable. We have Alejandra Rossi from Socialab in Uruguay, an incubator working with social enterprises all around Latin America. And we have Laura Tinelli from Acrux Partners, a boutique an impact advisory firm working with enterprises as well as with governments and investors in Latin America as well. So the plan for today, let me just go to the next slide, is to do a super brief intro on IRIS Plus. I really don't want to spend too much time here because I know you all dialed in to hear from our enterprises how they're managing their impact and how they're using IRIS Plus. But just for those of you who might be new to IRIS Plus, I'm going to do a 2-minute quick intro, and then we're going to pass the floor to our speakers just to hear their perspective and how they are managing impact and using IRIS Plus. A couple of housekeeping notes before we get started. I am recording today's session, and we are going to post that on the IRIS Plus website. So if you know of anybody who wanted to join, or if you need to hop off early, just know that the recording will be available. And we're also going to ask you all to keep your lines muted throughout the presentations, and then we'll open up to Q&A, and then we invite you to unmute your lines. But just to preserve audio quality, we're going to try to keep everybody muted. So without further ado, a brief overview of IRIS Plus, just for those of you who are not that familiar with it. IRIS Plus is a system to help measure, manage, and optimize impact. It is built on the 10 years of the IRIS catalog of metrics that the GIIN has managed. And it's a system that includes the IRIS catalog of metrics, but it includes a lot more than the catalog. And so what it aims to do, this system, is help translate impact goals and intentions into specific results. And so for that, IRIS Plus gives you a pathway or a way to frame your impact goals, either by SDGs or by impact categories or themes. Let's say if you're interested in financial inclusion or access to education or healthcare, let's say. It also gives you a built-in evidence base and research that you can use to inform your theory of change or to help anticipate expected impact. It gives you core metric sets. These are just short list of key indicators and metrics with specific guidance and to understand what to measure and how to measure for the specific goals that you may have. And it has also practical guidance and resources. And so you know as well, IRIS Plus is built in alignment with many different frameworks and tools, including the SDGs, the 2X Challenge, HIPSO, and whatnot. And it is, of course, a public good. IRIS Plus is ongoing development. So the themes you see on the top are the ones that are already available in IRIS Plus. And then on the bottom, on the left-hand side corner, are the ones we're working on now. We have quality jobs, water access, sanitation, and hygiene, and climate mitigation and climate change mitigation. We're kicking off very soon. My colleague Lisa Glasgow is on the line, and she's managing that work, can answer any questions of that towards the end. So this is just to say that it's an ongoing process where we partner with many of you on the line to work on this together. And since we launched IRIS Plus, it's crazy to think about a year ago to this date, we've had about 9,000 users, of which 6,000 are organizations. And from these 6,000, a large majority of them are investors, but also a lot of them are enterprises. And so today, really what we want to hear is how are enterprises using IRIS Plus? how do they manage their impact? Why do they use Iris Plus? Does it make things easier or not? And just hear from their own perspective. So to that end, Belissa, I'm going to start with you. If you can tell us a little bit more about Project X and why do you manage impact and how do you go about it, and where, where do you draw from Iris Plus to help on that end? And we can hear you, so let me make sure I unmute you.
Thank you, Leticia. I was receiving a message that I needed you to unmute me. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. I'm very happy to be here. Thanks, Leticia, for the introduction too. I think for purposes of the discussion, I need to explain a little bit what Project X is to put our intervention in context. So Project X is a social enterprise. It was incubated within the WWF and was created in 2017. As Leticia mentioned, Project X, what it does is to help companies and industries to adopt green innovations in their supply chain so these become more sustainable. The goal we have is to transform 10 industries and shift 10% of global procurement in 10 years. So that's why you have the 10 for Project X. X is for a 10, and it's also related to impact and financial return. For us, success is measured by the actual purchase contract, so it's a market transaction. So when the lead companies or the lead companies in an industry actually purchase from the green innovators, that for us is a metric of success. And we're going to see that in more detail in the next slides, but it's a very important consideration for you to have in mind. Right now, Project X has done a study to identify the 10 industries most damaging for the environment, because that leads our work. And we are also in the implementation of a project called Sdgs, which is food for food. And we're focusing on salmon and shrimp, working with Skretting, which is a Norwegian company, which has 30% of the global market for farm salmon. So this is as a context, because I'm going to give you a little bit more detail on Sdgs and how we measure impact for Sdgs in a few minutes. Next, please. So this slide, I think, Leticia, you mentioned why we measure impact, and I was thinking about 3 reasons that I wrote down in order not to forget. So one is, as you have seen, for us, impact is at the core of our mission. It's really about transforming industries so they're more sustainable. So beyond a procurement transaction, it's a transaction where the lead company buys from green innovators. That means that the innovation is more environmentally friendly. So for us, the impact on the planet is critical. So that's why we measure impact, number 1. Number 2, I would say we also measure impact because we want to show our stakeholders, and at this stage, our potential funders, donors, and investors, that we're really committed to measure impact. So that's why we measure it. It's not only saying that we have the goal, but showing that we have that goal. And I will tell you a little bit more how we do that. And I think the third reason is also to make sure that we're on track, right? If we are, as a company, setting the goal of helping people and planet, how do we know we're actually doing it? And that's very important because metrics are going to allow us to take corrective action as needed, because it's like a thermometer, like knowing, are we on track, we're not on track, and if we're not, what should we do different? So those are the 3 reasons why we measure impact, because it's in our mission, because it's important for our stakeholders, and also because to make sure we're on track. In the process of measuring impact, we try to set up an impact measurement and management framework. And I'm saying try because, as Leticia mentioned, typically this is something done by investors, impact investors, and all the focus is on them. And because of my previous life at the IDB Invest, I think the first thing I wanted to do when I joined Project X is to make sure that we had an IMM set up for enterprises. And of course, it's a challenge, as you all must know, if you work in an enterprise. But Iris Plus has been very helpful for us in the following sense. As Leticia mentioned, Iris Plus was launched a year ago, and by then Project X already existed. But then it was still useful for us because what we did with Iris Plus is to make sure that the goals we had were measured by metrics that were standards for the industry, right? So for example, if I just said earlier that for us, a market transaction is very important. Okay, is that an indicator in Iris Plus catalog that is equivalent or similar that we can use? So then we make sure that we can talk to more in the industry. So that was very important for us to validate and refine our metrics, although we already had it. And I can say that it was really useful, and I will show you an example in a couple of minutes. The other feature that was really helpful for us, it was the alignment of the SDGs. So when we select metrics that are related to a goal, and as you know, a goal can be measured in different ways. So having IRIS Plus really helped us focus in on specifics and narrow down the discussion based on the industry practices. But only when you do that, you discover that by selecting a metric, you can also have the alignment of the SDGs. And the great thing is the IRIS Plus team has already done the work. When I was at the IDB Invest, we set up a whole framework to justify our alignment to the SDGs, you know, with a lot of methodology, and we tested it, and it was a big deal. We had just our line of work for that, but when I use IRIS Plus, it's already done, so I don't have to justify it. The alignment of the SDGs, it's immediate. So that's something that I personally love. I find it fantastic. So thanks for that, by the way. It really saved us time. The other feature that was really important for us, and I know that they're working on expanding it, we had two programs in Project X that were our pilots, one in the health sector and the other in the feed industry. And for the one in the health sector, although we already had a theory of change, when I accessed the system and I saw the information there, it validated our theory of change, number one, but number two, it also helped me to update it because the program was designed, like, imagine 3 years ago, and then 2 years later, you need to see if had something changed, or is my theory of change still valid, or is there new research? And IRIS Plus had it there too, so that saved me a lot of time. And I think this is very important when I say that the work is already done and by experts and by consensus in the industry, because in enterprises, and especially startups, the resources are very scarce. So I think this is a big help personally for a company like Project X, because we have very limited staff. How do we use the information? We use it to communicate and fundraise. And when I say fundraise, it can be general things, you know, like you can put it in your website, or you can talk about it. You know, what's your approach? And we're using best practices, among them IRIS Plus, but also in our proposals to our donors, we're very specific about how we approach IMM and our efforts to align to best practices and standards like IRIS Plus. We use it too in our investors decks. And you're going to see we're just going to show the IRIS metrics that we use. There are other metrics that we use because they are important for us, even if they're not in the catalog, so we add them. So that's fine. And also when we talk about the alignment to the SDGs, which is something that investors today and everybody, donors too, are looking at. We also use our indicators and the reference to benchmarks in IMM in our board reports, and for our monitoring reports to our stakeholders, donors, or investors. And something that is very important to consider is that Project X is at very early stages. So mainly I'm going to focus on the design phase. So how are we using IRIS Plus in a new company that is setting up its framework, that is setting up its programs? And that's why when you see in the slide that there is a note for evaluation and it says plan, is because we haven't done an evaluation yet, because we're in the implementation process. And in terms of benefits, I think I mentioned it, so I go very quickly. It shows our commitment to impact. The fact that you put yourself out there saying, I'm using best practices, not my own thing. I think it's important. It shows robustness in the methodology that we use, the consistency too, and you're going to see that in the next slide, that we can go from programs to the company level very easily with the same indicators, so that's very important. And also, we can contribute to the industry, because if we use industry indicators or sector indicators that are in IRIS Plus, at some point we're going to contribute to aggregate data in the ecosystem, which is something that we need to make the case for impact investing, right? And demonstrate, yes, it's possible to have impact and financial return. I also mentioned improved decision making. For example, Project X, and I didn't say it, but it's very important for us to be fast. And we haven't been as fast as we wanted. So that's an example. We have an indicator of time, and we know, oh, this didn't happen as expected. Why? And of course, the crisis is not helping right now. So this is the kind of benefits that we see. And I think if at some point we all communicate as enterprises with the same language, I think we're going to reduce the reporting burden that many investors and donors ask on us. I'm sure that you all share with me this sometimes frustration that every donor or every investor wants different information. If we all unite and use a standard, then I think it's going to make our life easier. But that's work in progress, as you all know. Next, please. Yes, so this is Project X as a company. It's a quick view and it's in design phase. So if you have any feedback, it's more than welcome. The idea here is that in the verticals, you're gonna see the 10 industries we identify in our study as those that needed intervention in terms of helping those industries to have their supply chain to be more sustainable. And I really, I don't know, I got excited with Iris Plus and I put this together and I was hoping it looked pretty. I hope you think it does. But basically, I really like how we go from the industry to the impact themes that you see in the second row. And then what I like too is imagine that Project X has 2 programs right now, but we want to work in the 10 industries. But we already can say, what are the indicators or what are we looking for to achieve in each of the industries? And you see when there is a blank is because we didn't find it in Iris Plus. And again, I go back to my point. It's not that it doesn't exist, but that shows the difference. By using Iris Plus, I can do this fast. If I want to fill the other ones, I have to do more research. And because I was putting it together, you know, for my own purposes to try to think about the IMM, I just left it like that. But this is an example of how Iris Plus is helpful. And you see it in the columns that have actual indicators saying arithmetrics, intermediate outcomes by industry. So I can have indicators by industry, which is great because it's going to help me narrow the discussion, also give an idea to investors and stakeholders, what is it that we're trying to achieve? But I also like the fact that there are indicators that are common to all industries. And you're going to see that. For example, if we look at supply organizations, SMEs, which are for us green innovators selling into the supply chain. That applies to all industries. So it can be both an industry indicator for each program, but also a company indicator. Then also you have purchase contracts. And I said earlier that for us, market transactions were very important. So I was very happily surprised when I saw that Iris Plus that had that indicator. And we can use that instead of our own wording that we can come up with, because it's actually the same concept, right? And then when I think about outcome indicators more at the impact level, ultimately what we want is reduce the production of greenhouse gas emissions from the supply chains for each industry. And at the bottom, I have one slide that put them all together, but here I like it because it also shows for each industry, if we work in the supply chain, what are the SDGs that we're hoping to contribute to. So again, this is the design phase, but it gives you an idea of how you can mix your own goals and your own perspective into how to measure impact with the catalog of Iris Plus and all the information they can provide, including alignment to SDGs. And I found also the things very important because it can also help on the conversation, not only with donors or investors, but also potential partners. I forgot about that. That's very important too. Okay, if we have the same goal or a similar one, can we partner together and work together to achieve that goal? Next. Okay, and this is FeedX. So FeedX is food for food, how to improve the way salmon and shrimps are fed and trying to reduce the protein intake it takes to feed those fish or other fish for feeding fish. And basically, here you can see a little bit in more detail what I mentioned before. We have the contribution to the SDGs, which is very easy to come up with once you have the indicator selected. And if you see, I have highlighted fish type produced, because given that is the FeedX program, the feed industry, and we're working with salmon and shrimp, this is the indicator that jumps in because it's specific to this program, right? So this is a little bit what I mentioned before in terms of the vertical and the company level. So Iris Plus indicators and metrics will allow you to both have indicators at the program level or by sector or by industry, but also you have some that you can use at the portfolio level or company level, which I find very useful. I hope I didn't go too fast. If I did, I'm sorry, but I had 10 minutes and I'm very happy to answer any questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Belissa. That was super interesting. And I think we'll open up at the end for questions. And so a couple of things that I would invite anybody on the line. Feel free to start using the chat box and sending your questions, and then we'll open up and start reading those from the top. Somebody asked if we're going to post the slides. Yes, we will post them on the Iris Plus website, so no need to take notes. one thing that I think is really interesting, Belissa, of your case is, not only how it can be used in early stages, you don't need to necessarily, be having an established enterprise, but also, when we look at some of the industries that you're saving, are you working on, they're not the typical industries that will come to mind first if you're thinking about, a lot of the work in impact investing. And actually what you're showing is that you can take on these more traditional industries and work on, shifting the supply chain, which I think it's really interesting. But just to keep us moving and on time, and again, please start sending all your questions for Belissa on the chat box. I'm going to move us to our next speaker, Alejandra Rossi from Socialab. Alejandra, you are an incubator. So I would love to hear from you, what is the role of an incubator when it comes to, managing impact? And why, or do you think that it's important when you see across all the different enterprises you're working with, what is the value of harmonization of impact measurement and management and that end? I want to make sure you are unmuted as well. Wait. There you go.
Okay, can you hear me okay? Good. So thank you so much for this invite, and I love listening to Belissa first because I think we have a lot of points in common, either the reasons why we use Iris Plus and how we have used it. So I love this webinar already. As Leticia said, so at Socialab, we are an incubator for early stage social enterprises in Latin America. In particular, I'm based in Uruguay. For those that are more international, we are a small country between Argentina and Brazil. So we are a good country for making experiments and trying out new things. And in that context is that we try making an impact measurement report that hopefully we then can expand to other countries in Latin America. And I think a crucial point or a crucial reason why we did all this work that I'm gonna show you later on, and that you can download on that link that you see on the slide, is because of what our role is in the entrepreneurial ecosystem. And I feel our role as an incubator is to build the pipeline of social enterprises. And not only that, but also building the bridge between entrepreneurs and potential investors and donors. And one thing that happens to me all the time, that I participate in many meetings with potential investors or people that want to build the impact investing ecosystem in the country, is that in every single meeting, there is always one person that raises their hand and says like, yeah, we would love to invest more in this country, or we would love to grow the field of impact investing, but there are no projects, there are no companies to invest in. And I always get frustrated because I can give specific examples, and I also raise my hand and explain to the people what kind of companies we're working with and what they're doing. But I always feel that that is not enough, that I feel we are not speaking the same language. It's like investors are looking for more results or specific things, or things that are more advanced and that can grow. And I feel Iris Plus and measuring impact is a way of generating that common language, that we can speak the same language. And actually, after we built this report that we just published it a couple months ago, some of those investors that always raise their hands at those meetings wrote to me and say, now I get what you mean, that there is a pipeline in Uruguay and we should actually be investing and putting more money into this country and into this field. So that's why I think we are the translators or the bridge between entrepreneurs and investors. And that goes both ways, because then you have to go and talk to entrepreneurs and say, this is important, like you should be talking to investors in this way. But they are early stage entrepreneurs, so they have tons of things to do, and measuring impact is not one of their priorities. So that's where I feel we can add a lot of value as an incubator, showing them that this is important and helping them out in this process to try to help them juggle all the things they have to do plus this. So in particular, what we did is this report that you see there, and you can download it on this link. And if you can move to the next one, Letty. Perfect. And this is the process we did to come up with this report. As you see, step one, we started with the Iris Plus metrics. And why that? Because we decided to measure the impact of all the companies we have in our portfolio. Currently, there are 25. And we said, we know what they're doing, but it's hard to, but they are not all of them are measuring impact. So we need to start with a list of things that are possible to measure, to make the job easier for them. It's not that just come up with your own metrics or just come up with what you're measuring. Let's see what is the universe of things that you can measure. And we started by taking like a checklist of Iris Plus metrics, like exploring the catalog and seeing, okay, from all these metrics, which ones will apply to our entrepreneurs. So that's the first step we took. Then I think, again, related to what Belissa said, we wanted to classify those metrics and align them to SDG goals, because that's something that entrepreneurs are used to talking about, because we have classified our portfolio into the different SDGs areas. And it's also a common language for everyone, not only investors, but also other institutions and other actors and stakeholders in the ecosystem. So first we explored the Iris Plus, then we saw which ones would apply to the different areas of impact of our entrepreneurs. And then we actually went to the entrepreneurs and did the impact measurement. We said, okay, we have this set of metrics that we suggest for you. Which ones do you have numbers to put on? Which ones do you think don't apply? Which ones do you think you could start measuring from now on, even if you're not ready for this report, but for the next one? And that simplified the job a lot, because I know that we have tried before to sit down with an entrepreneur and say, okay, let's try to start measuring your impact or where you're going. It's always hard for them to come up with things. And this way, all around, it was like, okay, just pick and choose. It was like a menu. It's easier if you go to a restaurant and you have a menu, you just pick from a set of options. And you also understand where they come from and where they are in the big picture with the SDGs. Then we just need you to do the work of telling us what you want and what you have. And after all, we also added a fourth step, which for us was crucial, that was to gather all that data and write a report. For us, that was very important because of what I said at the beginning. This is a bridge, and it's like building a common language between entrepreneur investors and all of the ecosystem. So if we just had a nice Excel sheet, nobody would look at it unless they like finance or numbers. So we wanted to be something that was friendly for everybody and that was understandable. So Letty, if you can move to the next one. This is part of the report. That there we show some of the Iris Plus metrics that we chose. We wanted to have some that were across companies, regardless of their sector and the areas of impact for them. In that way, we could have a picture of the whole portfolio and where they were impacting, and those were the ones that we selected from Iris Plus. And if you move to the next one, this is how we presented them. For instance, for number one there, operational model, that is one of the impact Iris Plus metrics. This is how we presented it. We wanted to show it in a way that people that are not from this world understand it. So we don't want to create a niche, but rather to open that niche to the world, let's say. Then the same with impact category. And if you go to the next one, we have where the clients are located. So we could have showed the same thing in a table on Excel, but we didn't want that. We wanted to show it in this way that is easily understandable by everyone. And those are some examples of the Iris Plus metrics that we use across companies. But then if you move to the next slide, we have an example of one actual social enterprise and how we presented them. We did that for all 25 companies. So there on top on sky blue or blue, you can see what the company does. And then right under it, we ask all of the entrepreneurs what their mission is, what their vision is, and what will be the last step in their theory of change. Where do they want to get? Because they are early stage companies. Maybe they are not creating the whole impact they want today, but they need to have that North Star. And if they cannot measure it yet, it doesn't matter, it shouldn't be there. So we put it there on top. And then we moved to present the indicators that we had for them, and again classify by SDG. So there, in the case of Calmo, which is a company that produces clothes that are sustainable and that give jobs to women. We have SDG number 5, 8, and 12, and for each of those SDGs, some indicators that some of them were, again, as Belissa said, were from IRIS Plus, but for some of them we didn't have an IRIS Plus metric, so we created it. And in that case, that was the step 3, the dialogue with the entrepreneur, because some of them surprise us and say, yeah, but on top of what you are proposing me, I'm also measuring this and this. So we make sure we all agree and fill in the blanks of that table as well. And we didn't present in a table shape, but it's the same thing behind it. So that's why I see the parallel and the different ways in which you can do that. So that was our work. I think it has worked tremendously, even just to get an email from those people that participate in the meetings and always say there are no projects to invest in. Now they are writing to me and say, oh, I have a set of options, you were right. It has also, I think just by the fact of being here, like I think we chose the right set of metrics or the right system because it's something that is used globally, not just in Uruguay. We're a small country and we're always looking at how we can connect to the rest of the world. And if we had just set up a set of metrics created by us, we would be talking just in our community or our ecosystem. This is a way of starting small and setting this from like day one in very early stages, but that can also expand and grow with them as they grow, because we are teaching them the same language that everyone understands. So I think it has been a great choice that was actually suggested by Maria Laura Tinelli, who comes next. So thank you again for her.
I was muted. Thank you, Alejandra, very much. It's so interesting to see, how, IRIS Plus can provide this common language, all around the world, and really see it from your experience. So as you well said, we're going to move next to Maria Laura Tinelli. Maria Laura works across the entire impact ecosystem spectrum, and that's why we wanted to have her today on this session to give us a little of her view. She talks to governments, she talks to investors, she talks to enterprises, so she really understands the whole ecosystem. So Maria Laura, I want to make sure you're unmuted, so let me check. But we'd love to hear from your end, what have you seen, as what have you seen as, IRIS Plus helping in terms of enterprises, and what are some areas that, we still see as challenges? And that's something also I would love to hear from, all the enterprises on the line, as well as our speakers. What are other areas where we still need to advance and move to? But Malala, let me make sure you are unmuted.
Now
there we go. There we
go. Thank you. So thank you so much, Leticia, and thank you everybody for joining in the webinar today. It's a real pleasure for me to be part of this webinar. The GIIN is an institution that from the very early days of the idea of Acrux, not even the company, I looked up to. So it's really a privilege to be here with you today. I'll tell you in 1 minute what Acrux stands for, and also all of the multiple hats I wear, so that you understand where I'm coming from with the comments that I will make. So Acrux, it's an impact investment intermediary firm. As you probably all know, the market needs 3 sets of key players or stakeholders. One is the offer of capital, one is the intermediation of that capital, and the third one is the demand for that capital. So we work across the board with everything from private investors to governments, multilateral agencies, all the way down to incubators and entrepreneurs, social entrepreneurs, impact entrepreneurs. And on that journey, we have seen many of the pain points that every stakeholder feel, many of which have been already mentioned both by Alejandra and Belissa just now. They don't see the pipeline, or they don't or they demand different ways of reporting and measuring impact, or they don't understand how to choose from all the multitude of different measuring and reporting options that the market has there to offer. So we work with these institutions, advising them on strategy, advising them on how to monitor, how to report their impact, and basically how to leapfrog and move forward in this market. We're based both in the UK and in Argentina, and we focus on sort of passing on best practice coming from more developed markets such as European markets, US, Australia, etc., into less developed markets in terms of impact investment, such as the ones that we find in the Southern Cone or in Latin America across the board. So today I'm going to talk, no, you can move forward if you like. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what does impact measurement and reporting look like from where I sit. And I sit not only as director and founder of Acrux, but also as a trustee of the Global Steering Group on Impact Investment, and as an advisor to the likes of the UNPRI in the past for impact investment, and presently the UNDP on their SDG impact initiative. And from where I sit, there's a lot of confusion in the market, and that's why IRIS Plus and the GIIN play such an important role. As you're probably aware, impact investment is making the headlines. It has been for a number of years, but what we see now, and especially after COVID, it's an acceleration of big brands, big names making it to the headlines in terms of they're opening a fund on impact investment, or they're beginning to report on their impact, or they're aligning their investments to SDGs. So we see more and more news coming to the mainstream and to main media like the Financial Times or the Guardian or many of the financial newspapers around the world about this big brand names coming into the market. But as a result of that, we also see, and if you wouldn't mind moving to the next slide. As a result of that, we also see a risk. So we see an opportunity, and then that opportunity, it's also catalyzed by COVID, because there's a lot of capital, so patient capital, but also private capital moving into the impact spectrum. We see a risk of, if this is not done properly, if this is not reported properly, the risk is that we undermine the value of doing impact investment right. And we undermine the value of organizations that are actually investing with impact and are reporting impact in a robust manner. So at the same time that we're seeing the news about BlackRock and many big brands coming into the market, and many big funding pots coming from the UN, the Inter-American Development Bank, the European Investment Fund, and you name it, into the market to respond to COVID in the aftermath. We're also seeing a lot of news, and all of this news have come up in the last month. They're not old, they're very recent, about the risk, the huge risk that all these movers and shakers coming into the impact market present for what we call the green, the blue, or the rainbow washing. When we talk about SDG washing, we talk about the rainbow washing. Hence, one of the main messages that I want to convey today is the importance, and I cannot underline enough, of impact measurement and reporting in the next decade. Why? Because we're going to come out of COVID differently, and economies are going to look very different. And in order to build back better, we need to A, understand what better looks like. B, we need to be able to see it, and the only way to see it is if we measure it. And C, we need to be able to report it with a consistent framework across the board. If you wouldn't mind, Leticia, moving to the next slide. Thank you so much. So as you're probably all aware, we are in a stage of market development that present us with multiple options on how to report, and it's sometimes very difficult to make sense of the whole thing. Many of the work, a lot of the work that we have done over the past 2 years in Latin America is precisely advise investors or organizations such as Socialab or governments or multilaterals on how is it that we're supposed to report and measure impact. And this is a very competitive market. There's many players that come in and come out, or come in and stay. But there a few initiatives that have been in the market for long enough and that have taken an approach that is not a competitive approach, but as a collaborative approach. And to me, the main player within that collaboration and within that moving the market forward and moving how does the market report and how can we all convene into a conversation that it's the same and that we can compare pears against pears and not pears against bananas, it's precisely IRIS and IRIS Plus. If you all remember, IRIS was used as what was running behind the B Lab's way of measurement, and what B Lab had figured out how to do was basically simplify a little bit the taxonomy that IRIS presented. And what IRIS Plus has managed to do is pick the key market players in terms of reporting, of impact reporting, and bring them together into a streamlined version, an easy enough to use version that both investors, as Leticia mentioned, 6,000 of them are using the platform already, an entrepreneur and an incubator like Socialab can use, and a company such as Sdgs can use to report on impact, and that when they do, it all becomes comparable, and we all have a way to measure how we're progressing on our journey towards impact and towards filling the gap that the SDGs have in order to achieve them in a decade's time. So what IRIS has managed to do is bring together the likes of the Impact Management Project, which is where the conversation at 40,000 feet of height is happening between all the big players, the UN agencies, the IFC, the World Benchmarking Alliance, the PRI. All of these key players that cater for different slices of the market are convening in the Impact Management Project structured network in order to align and streamline what they're offering to the market in terms of reporting and impact. It has managed to also convey the SDGs in a way that it's understandable, digestible, and easy enough to use by, as I said before, a multitude of stakeholders within the food chain of impact investment. It has managed to make it simpler for a company that is not a large corporation that can afford and use the GRI, the Global Reporting Initiative, or the Integrated Reporting Initiative. And maybe it's an SME or an entrepreneur that wants to report on impact and that wants to see how it's progressing on its journey towards contributing to the SDGs to do so. It has basically brought all these actors together in a tangible way, so as to use to benefit and to use all the advances that all these different stakeholders of the market had done in their own sort of slice of the market to take it forward. I see two big trends that the IRIS Plus has put at the core of what they offer. One of those is not a trend, it's a reality, is the SDGs. We cannot report on impact moving forward if we're not aligning what we are reporting on and monitoring to the SDGs. And IRIS Plus has done that brilliantly. I would say there are two key spaces to watch in terms of SDG reporting tied to impact. One is IRIS Plus and the other one is SDG Impact, which is providing also not a tool itself, but a set of standards of best practice. The IRIS Plus has also brought in and simplified in a way the language of the Impact Management Project, which can be foreign for some players within, some stakeholders within the impact investment field. And it is constantly being adapted, which means that because the GIIN is part of all these conversations, when you use IRIS Plus, you can be sure that if there are advances in this conversation, this will be picked up and brought in. It's a live tool. It's not a static tool. It's not set on stone, and that's a good thing. So one last comment from my side is where's the conversation now in terms of COVID? As in the 1930s, crisis, what came out of the crisis was a streamlined and more unified way of accounting for the financial sector and the corporate sector worldwide. What everybody's talking about is that what's going to come out of COVID, it's an impact reporting streamlined methodology through which we can all sort of align our efforts and walk together towards the same common aim. For that, you need to monitor. For that, you need to report. And I think the GIIN and IRIS Plus stand at the core of this new phase moving forward right now and after COVID. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Maria Laura. It's so great to to hear again like the perspectives from from the field and from different angles of the market on what is helpful. And we still know, I mean, we really appreciate all the benefits that you have all mentioned of IRIS Plus, but we still know that there's a long road ahead. But what's important is that we work on it in it together. And like, as I think you all refer to this, it's a journey. And but we see this not just on anecdotal evidence, but also the GIIN's research, the State of IMM survey. We do see how this field has been progressing and advancing quite a bit in the last few years, which is incredibly encouraging. To that end, we have about 15 more minutes, and so this is the time when we want to. Oh, sorry, I didn't realize that was there. We want to open the floor to all of you on the line to ask any questions to our speakers or to us at the GIIN on any questions you might have. There were a few that have already come through the chat box, so I'm going to start with those. And if you have any others, please feel free to put them on the chat box, or you can raise your hand and I'll call you and unmute you and we can just hear you. The first question from Vivina, I think this applies to anybody, but I would imagine to Belissa first because of what you were referring in terms of the SDGs. He says, how do you move from mapping to the SDGs toward actually measuring how much each activity contributes to each one? Also, how can a company and or investor measure the net positive contribution, positive minus negative? Oh wait, did you go back on that weird mute?
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. These are great questions and not very easy to answer, but I will give it a shot. And I hope the other speakers help me. So basically, I think this is a very relevant question, because something that I didn't like very much is when like an SDG washing, right? All of a sudden, everybody and everything was aligned to the SDGs. And I think the other panelists talk about this. So to me, I think something that's very important is to distinguish like broad alignment that you can justify with actual contribution, and a contribution like this, right? And meaning what? The SDGs definition have a set of indicators that are very specific, but they also have a broad definition. So for me, if you look at your company or your goals and whatever you're doing, and you're not aligned to the indicators, but to the idea behind the SDG, you're aligned, I think it needs to be justified. Why do you think you're aligned and how you're going to measure it? And measure it is not only about I'm planning on contributing to the SDGs or I'm aligned because of this indicator, but then how do you monitor it and report on it, right? So at the end, if I'm saying that the adoption of green innovations is going to improve the sustainability of the supply chain, well, in terms of what? Is it reduction of greenhouse gas emissions? How much? Right? And if I have a concrete indicator that is aligned to the indicators in the SDG, it's very easy to do the parallel, as long as you measure the actual value of the indicators. But if that's not available and you have other indicators that are not included, that can also be valid. But again, to me, the key is understanding why we say we're aligned and having a methodology behind, or I think that's why IRIS Plus is so helpful. But also not only ex ante, but actually ex post. What did actually happen? And I think this is very important. That's what I would say. So for us, for example, in Project X, we have the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions as a key indicator. And maybe we are, in Spanish you say, una gota en un océano, like a drop in the ocean. But at least we will know how much we're contributing, and that's it. And at the end, we're going to have, in an ideal world, even investment and return. I invest this much in this company, and I'm getting this reduction of greenhouse gas emission. That's our dream of benchmarking, but it gives you an idea of even improvement, right? Maybe we're more efficient with each program, maybe much faster with each program, right? But I think for me, the key is really the actual reporting on the indicators, whatever you're choosing, and being very clear about not claiming things that we cannot back up by evidence. And that's the key. It needs to be backed up by evidence and by data. Otherwise, it's just a wish, and then we put in risk the whole industry and our credibility. So that's what I would say for the first question, but I welcome my other panelists to help me and complement. And the other one, which is also a very difficult question in terms of positive and negative impact, I think the IMP talks about that in its 5 dimensions. So that's something to look at. And at the end, I think an indicator an indicator is not good or bad per se, right? I mean, the greenhouse gas emissions can improve or can decrease. So I think it's really about looking at the model behind in the theory of change and saying, okay, what are the potential risks of creating damaging and how we measure that? Again, it's all about indicators. Sometimes it can be the same indicator, sometimes it needs to be another indicator. So that's one thing, and I think it's very important. The other one I would look at is that the ESG standards, right? Maybe I can have great impact in terms of the goals of the company, and then in terms of ESG standards, how we treat the employees or the governance, sorry. It's not working well and it's not meeting the minimum standards. So that's something to consider, even if it's qualitative. And the other one that I think as an economist, that will be the most straightforward way of doing it, but not too obvious, is an economic cost-benefit analysis. Because in the cost-benefit analysis, we're going to look at the economic benefits, but also at the potential externalities in terms of negative effects. And at the end, that's a way of including it in a single place. And it's not very used. The IDB Invest, we used it for each investment. We had an economic analysis there. It's not very easy then to monitor it. Normally, you're going to do it ex ante and ex post. But I think what is valid is the question per se. I think if from the beginning, you look at the question and you think, and what is the logic and how can I measure positive and negative effects, and you put it out there, I think that's the first step. And something in my experience that's very important is not because you think you cannot measure it, don't put it there. We need to have this idea of the ideal situation. If I could measure anything, what would that be? And that gives the idea of a north or a benchmark. Then it might not be possible, then you use proxies, but at least you have all the considerations in place. In the case of Project X, you haven't seen that because we are a facilitator for the lead companies, in the industries to improve their supply chain. So we don't have a direct negative effect, if anything, unless, we pick the wrong innovations that make things worse. But we will prove that with the same indicators. I hope that's not the case, but yes, well, that will be my answer. So I think it's not an easy answer, and I'm happy to discuss further after this call, or you can contact me and we can brainstorm about it.
Thank you, Belissa. Another question that came in, and maybe Maria Laura, I'll ping it to you since you have worked with so many enterprises. Impact reviews. So how frequent should somebody review metrics? Biannually, annually? Are there specific periods, or does it really depend on what you're trying to measure? Oh, wait, the unmute. This Ring Central is muting you all the time. There you go.
Now we are. So how often? Ideally not too often, because otherwise you won't be able to compare. You won't be able to compare progress year after year. With that, I'm not saying that if you started with a set of X amount of metrics and indicators on year 1 and it's year 10, you're not going to revisit them. But ideally, you don't revisit the metrics. You take your time and select them carefully when you start, and then you measure against, and you're not revisiting all the time. The market is revisiting enough, and that's why initiatives such as Iris Plus or the Impact Management Project are keeping abreast of those developments, are translating that into improvements in what they already offer into the market. So if you're using one of the key players within the impact measurement and reporting, like Iris Plus or like the SDG impact standards or like the Impact Management Project, and I must clarify that the 3 are used at different levels of the food chain, so you're covered. I mean, the revisiting will be done for you, and hence the beauty of this.
Thank you. We have another question that says, how we select the main indicator that shows impact the most? Is there any standard or recommended process when you will select one? And I'll jump in, but then Alejandra, also please jump in, and maybe in your experience how it worked with, when you're talking with the entrepreneurs, or which one was going to be that, indicator that represents the impact the most for them. what I would say, so here Iris Plus, is built in alignment with the 5 dimensions of impact. And so for each specific, so I mean, you have to start with a goal of what is that that you want to achieve. And as Belissa was saying, you want to make sure that there's evidence that backs that the intervention that you're planning links to that ultimate goal. And then following with the 5 dimensions of impact, when you look at the what is what are you trying to achieve, and there's where you have to define what is the outcome that you're driving towards. And so find what is the best indicator that helps you achieve that outcome. The core metric sets that we have in Iris Plus already do that job for you for the for the themes that they are available. But if they're in themes where they're not available yet, I would follow that that path of follow the 5 dimensions, start with the the ultimate objective, make sure there's evidence behind it, and then what is an indicator that exists that you can use to measure the specific outcome you want to achieve. And I mean, and maybe go into what Alejandra was saying, using the Iris catalog of metrics as a start. It could be a good way also to help you find the ones, again, if they're not on the core metric sets. But I would definitely encourage people to go to the core metric sets first instead of having to recreate the wheel. Ale, anything you would add?
Yes, I would add something regarding this question and the previous one. And this coming more from this side where I'm standing, that it's also important to consider what you can measure, because sometimes we overcomplicate so much. Like, I would love to do randomized controlled trials. I know what's the high standard, but if you are always looking to try to get there, then you do nothing, because especially in very early stages, it's impossible to do these things. So I would say, when you choose the indicator, also consider how simple it is to measure it and what the entrepreneurs have access to. And then, of course, you're going to move forward. And for this report, we know we have some things we want to improve for the next one. And for that, we also need to take the entrepreneurs there with us. So I would say it's a balance between what works and what are the key metrics are, but also bearing in mind that you need to measure them. And how are you going to do it? That's what I would say.
I will add one very small thing to everything that all of you said, which is, when you're selecting the core metric that you're going to use, or try to make sure that it's tied to the core of the business, so you can see if the business scales, if the impact scales. So try and focus the metric to the core of the business, not only of the impact. So you need to blend the two.
Yeah.
Excellent. We have about 2 more minutes and a lot more questions. So I'm going to pick one first, and then I want to move to some next steps to show you as well. I'm going to try to answer actually 2 questions in one. So Tom Adlam, you say, I can well understand the value delivered by Iris Plus to enterprises who use its metrics and resource base to manage the impact of their operations and their intermediaries. And their operations. I find it less easy to understand how investors and their intermediaries use it, both in aggregate and in benchmarking their performance against others. How does the GIIN's investor members engage with the development of Iris Plus to deliver what they want from it? So, I mean, in a nutshell, we work very closely with investors. Investors are, the core of the GIIN's audience. On the Iris Plus side, we work more broadly, with the entire ecosystem, but investors are always our main audience, because Iris Plus is housed at the GIIN, which is an investor network. I think, and actually, we have a number of investors on the line, so I would invite them also to jump in. But, Iris Plus is used by a lot of investors to, it helps either from their end to understand, what is that they will want to measure and report, to understand the performance of their investment. So it starts with, if you want to understand the performance of your portfolio, again, either using the Sdgs or, impact categories, how do you structure that, and what you will want to measure, what data you will want. Eventually the data will come from the enterprises, but what is the data that you want? In many cases, that starts a conversation with enterprises. This is what we're trying to measure. What do you think? Do you have this data? Is this valuable for you or not? Some other cases, we also heard of investors who just directly request from the enterprises, please, report to me on these metrics. And how do GIIN investor members engage with us? They engage a lot, both in the development of Iris Plus through the Iris Plus working group. They would participate in our public comment periods. And then through our membership also, we do a number of workshops with investors, both on IMM as well as on other topics. So investors engage quite a bit on the development of IRIS Plus. And on the question on benchmarks, this is something that the GIIN is trying to work towards. And so if you have heard of the impact performance study that the GIIN has, which has been, we're now in our second edition, but the first edition was just a first attempt at can we aggregate metrics, impact performance at a sector level, and what can we say about it. And so the first edition, we looked at affordable housing and clean energy access. Now there's a second edition looking at financial inclusion and agriculture. We proved that yes, we can aggregate metrics and impact data on a sector level and say something about it. And this work is very closely interrelated with IRIS Plus. IRIS Plus gives you the data that is standardized that you need to then be able to aggregate it at a sector level and be able to pave the way towards benchmarks. So we're not in benchmarks yet, but we are definitely paving the way. There's also another question on how people can get involved. There's lots of opportunities to get involved with IRIS Plus. We had a slide early on the thematic development, so that would be one of the ways. So for example, what we have in development right now, we're actively working with quality jobs on the development of the quality jobs themes in partnership with the ILO, and any stakeholder that is interested in participating of that work, they're welcome to join us through working group calls and sessions. This gets first developed in the Navigating Impact Project theme and then eventually makes it to IRIS Plus. And then we're about to launch climate change mitigation. We're announcing today the partnership with Ceres. We're going to be working with them as our expert partner. So if you're interested in joining on this conversation or anything other, Simon, on IRIS Plus, I think the question came from you, just email me and we'll point you to the right place. And so also to that end, there's different opportunities to engage, with the GIIN and IRIS Plus, on the IRIS Plus and IMM side, with the working group. We also do, guidance and use cases. And as we continue to develop themes, on our research group, the impact performance studies are ongoing. If anybody's interested in participating on this, just let us know. And then membership also holds, we have members from 45 different countries and, over 300 members. They have specific work streams they work with, and they also have a product development platform where they bring together asset owners with fund managers to structure specific products. One announcement that I'd love to make is that our membership team is also offering a COVID-related product structure workshop on the 26th, and actually it's going to be open to anybody, not just members. So any investor interested in joining, reach out to us and we'll connect you there. We are past the hour, so I apologize for that, but I want to thank you all very much, and a special thank you to our fantastic speakers for sharing all the great work you do every day, and we're pleased that IRIS Plus can help ease some of the pain points and bring this common language, but we know there's much more to do, and we look forward to continue to hear how you and your journey advances so that we also can learn from that and incorporate that in IRIS Plus. So thank you all very much for joining us today. Slides and recording will be available on the website. And if you have any questions, either for us at the GIIN or for our speakers, feel free to send it to us and we'll reroute you to our speakers. Thank you all very much.